Mental health, mental wellness, mental well-being. Areas of increasing focus. Where does stargazing fit in? Welcome to Talking Psychiatry. In this episode, I'm going to be in conversation with Marc Roffey. Marc is a psychiatrist. He is also a certified mindfulness facilitator. He's had a lifelong interest in astronomy and is a member of the Astronomical Society of South Africa. So, let's check into the conversation and hear what Marc had to say. Marc, good to see you, and thank you for joining me for this episode of Talking Psychiatry. How are you today?
Christopher, thank you for inviting me. I'm good, thank you. And you?
Excellent. No, I'm very excited to be seeing you. Unfortunately, not in the flesh, but at least with technology, we managed to connect. So I think that the topic is a really interesting one because we're looking at, broadly speaking, astronomy, mental health, mental well-being, mental wellness, stargazing, amateur astronomy. So there are a whole bunch of concepts that we're going to be covering, which may not be familiar to people, but actually you wrote a really fascinating piece, which we published in the May 2025 issue of South African Psychiatry, entitled, and I quote, Stargazing and the Mind, Amateur Astronomy and Mental Well-Being. So I think that that's pretty much where we're going to be taking this conversation. But the one thing I noticed in your bio for the article is that you've had a lifelong interest in astronomy. Do you want to walk us back to the origins and what that's all about in terms of your relationship and your love, I would imagine, for astronomy?
Yeah, certainly. It's a good question because it actually goes back a very long way. So I can remember the actual, how old I was. I think I was 5 years old. And my parents bought me a book or gave me a book, which you may be of the generation that you remember this. I'm not sure if these books were popular in South Africa. This was actually in England at the time. The Ladybird books. They're very small Ladybird books.
Yeah,
On
the
this
little ones.
Yeah.
Yes, I
And
remember
this was
that.
called, and this was called the Ladybird Book of Stars and Planets. And there was just something about it which I've actually still got it somewhere.
Okay.
That was published in 1965, written by an astronomer at Edinburgh, Edinburgh, and of course at that time hand illustrated. The images and the diagrams which were for children were not computer generated, so they were very interesting. I would say enchanting.
Authentic.
Something magic. Yeah. Diagrams of nebulae and planets and constellations and so on. And it made, it sort of drew me into that space in quite a profound way. And the feelings which that evoked in me are still, if I look at that book or look at illustrations, which you can find on the internet from that book, evoked something in me which I still feel, but it's taken me numerous decades to actually label those feelings as awe, a sense of awe, which is something that I write about in the article, and that we can get to discuss that because it's quite a topical thing.
Wonder.
in
awe and wonder.
Yeah.
I mean, you put the two terms together, and aside from wanting you just to define astronomy, because I think it's important as a term of reference, because then I want to get to this issue of awe and wonder from a personal experience. But astronomy, broadly speaking, how does one define it?
Well, I can't give you off the top of my head a scientific definition.
No. But just off the cuff.
To me, it feels like it's the study on some level of everything that is. It's a scientific
Yes.
study of the composition and structure and extent of the universe. Um, so conventionally that means, space. So
Yes.
space, everything that's in it. But arguably everything derives from that. So in one sense, astronomy is the study of everything, but in a conventional sense, it's the study of the structure and composition of the universe, I would say, and cosmology,
Right.
which is more mathematical, a more mathematical approach to that and less observational. Um,
Yes.
it seeks to answer the same questions: what is the universe? How old is it? What is its extent? What's its likely future, and so on.
But
Yeah,
that is a more scientific pursuit as opposed to just
yeah,
a broad concept of what
yeah,
that pursuit
yeah,
actually is.
yeah,
So you speak about amateur astronomy, and I'm
mm,
assuming amateur astronomy is basically what we would call stargazing for those of us who might have a
yeah,
telescope or just a pair of
mm,
eyes to look at the sky. And I have to
yeah,
tell you that not on the basis of your article, but your article was kind of where I was at the time. I took a trip to Sutherland in the Northern Cape, and
yes,
I was exposed to a night sky that I cannot remember seeing
mm,
for decades. Just to see the Milky Way and that
yeah,
sense of wonder and awe that you speak about, which we'll get into. And also, strangely enough, you also talk about accomplishment, which we'll touch on. That
yeah,
sense of saying, that's the Milky Way. There's the Southern Cross. Oh my word, there is Scorpio. I can see it. That sense of saying, okay, I think I've got a little bit of a feel. But I think what was really interesting for me was when I came away from that experience, it struck me that it was about the unseen. Because there's what
mm,
you see and there's what you
yes,
don't see unless you
mm,
have the correct equipment and you're suitably
yeah,
guided. And I sort of think it's almost like a metaphor for life. You kind of look
yeah,
out and you see what you see, but what is it that you don't see that is real, that is there? And with the
yeah,
appropriate equipment, let's call it a guide, and the appropriate guidance, you see things. So I came away from that experience in Sutherland with that kind of, that kind of thinking. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I just thought I'd share that personal reflection to just put you
yeah,
in the picture in terms of where I'm at.
yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Christopher. So, yeah, you said, insight and adventure, but it was almost like an epiphany, wasn't it? And
Yeah,
that's,
absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely an epiphany. And I
yeah,
think that, as you gaze into the night sky, and you begin to see what you didn't necessarily recognize
mm,
before, there is a bit of an epiphany. And I think that, the positive impact, which we will obviously talk about, I think, yes, I think epiphany is the right word. And so you've used
yeah,
that word quite easily and say, oh, you had an epiphany, but clearly that's something which maybe you've experienced or you've seen others experience. I don't know.
yeah. Yeah, we'll get to that, but just going back a bit to answer your question, and we can link that to your observation of awe and so on. So, yes,
Yeah.
amateur astronomy is, going out under the night sky and looking at it, either with the naked eye or binoculars or small telescopes or large telescopes. There's obviously a limit to how large an amateur telescope can be, but you can
Yes.
get pretty decent ones which can show you a lot of stuff that you can't see, with the naked eye or smaller telescopes. And that's part of the wonder of it is um, being able to see what's actually there and realizing that if you had more and more magnification, you would find more and more and more. So, um, but I just also want to make the point that something that you said is very relevant, that for many people on the planet,
Yes.
particularly in high density urban environments, um, people have lost that connection to the night sky and they may actually spend their entire lives
Yes.
without seeing it. Now, in South Africa, we're very uh, fortunate to have a relative abundance compared to other countries of so-called dark skies, and that is capital D, capital S. So it's a thing, it's a concept.
Yeah.
Dark
Okay.
skies. Um, And, so
What
South
do you,
Africans, yeah,
what do you mean by
mm,
what do you mean by that? Because obviously there's a concept, there is a thing, but what do you mean by dark skies?
yeah. So dark skies are skies where there's a relative absence of light pollution. So if I can sort of quantify that, there's a scale called the Bortle scale. Um,
Yes.
and I think it goes up to 8, if I'm not mistaken. So 1 to 8 or thereabouts. So in the center of Cape Town will be level 8, meaning that you can just make out major stars. In the middle of the
Okay.
Karoo, yeah,
So the higher the number, the less the visibility.
yeah. So what you really want is Bortle level 1 or 2. So in the Karoo and in Namibia and the Kalahari areas of Botswana, you've got Bortle level 1, which is fantastic. I've never seen Bortle level 1. The closest I've got is 2.
Yes.
But when you are away from the city and you get to that level of low light pollution, and the other important factor is you need to have dark adapted eyes. And this is a key concept which a lot of people just aren't aware of. So for example, at star parties, which are gatherings of, amateur astronomy enthusiasts who take themselves off for a weekend at least, usually they're 4 or 5 days, out into a place like the Karoo. Usually the entire campsite or lodge or whatever it is, guest farm is used for that purpose, which means that the owner will switch off all electric lights,
Okay.
and you navigate your equipment and your environment using red torches or red lights because that doesn't interfere with dark vision. So after about 15 or 20 minutes, when your eyes are fully dark adapted and you've got a clear uninterrupted view of the sky, then that is jaw dropping, takes your breath away and so on. And that's the aspect of stargazing that I think people can't appreciate unless they've actually experienced that.
So that's
Um,
very interesting because it almost seems like you have to prime yourself for
yeah,
optimal viewing in terms of
yeah,
getting your eyes to adapt to the dark. And
yes,
then you've got a better
yeah,
sense of the night
yeah,
sky. But I think what you
yeah,
said is so important. I was actually, because I was, going through your article and thinking about it and thinking about the extent to which as city dwellers,
uh,
we have lost touch with the night sky because we don't really see it in all of its fullness
yeah,
and its glory. And in fact, in a sense, we're kind of deprived, to be honest with
yeah,
you, when you
yeah.
think about what is out there and based on those levels of visibility. So something that I wanted to come to, which for me is fascinating, is the link that you draw between neuroscience and astronomy. And you raise a whole series of connections, which obviously
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about and I hadn't contemplated. But when I read how you'd kind of brought them together, I thought it's really fascinating. And there are actually some quite profound insights that one can derive from these coming together of neuroscience and astronomy. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the connections and maybe we can drill down into more detail?
Yeah, I've got the article in front of me, so maybe you can sort of guide
Yes,
me
we can
through
walk
some.
through it. Yes.
Yeah,
Well, you start out with the issue of electromagnetic radiation, and obviously
yeah,
that's imaging, but clearly electromagnetic radiation is part of our technology in terms of
yes,
visualization.
yeah,
So we're using similar technology for different purposes in a sense.
yeah, absolutely. So I think the key thing here in terms of astronomy as a science is that when we do go out into the, under the skies and we look up, all we're seeing is visible light, which is a very narrow part of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. But every celestial body is actually emitting at multiple frequencies. Hence the term multi-wavelength astronomy, meaning that for example, when we're looking at galaxies, um, and the large scale of structure of the universe, we're limited by what we can see observationally because of clouds of
Okay.
interstellar gas and so on. whereas radio waves penetrate through that and can give you a much more accurate map of what's going on. Hence
Right.
the SKA project, which I have to talk about as a South
Yes, no,
African.
of course. It's a major
Yeah,
issue, and I think you should. Why don't you talk about it right now? Because I mean, there's the two
yeah,
big issues there. There's the SALT,
yes,
the South African Long
yeah,
Telescope in
yeah,
Sutherland, and then there's
yeah,
the SKA, the Square Kilometer Array in Carnarvon. Is that
yes,
right?
yeah. It's in the
Floors,
Northern Cape. Yeah,
floor
yeah.
is
So
yours.
the Square Kilometer Array telescope is it's going to be nearing completion probably in yeah towards the end of this
2030.
decade. Yeah,
Right.
as I understand it. But the functioning part of it at the moment is called the Meerkat array, and I think that's a lot of people have heard of that.
Yes.
And that
Yes.
really is functioning extremely well and producing high level science and attracting a lot of astronomers from around the world who want to book time with the Meerkat so that they can do astronomy. But that, as I say, is high tech radio wavelength astronomy. So we probably
Right.
shouldn't go far too far down that road. But just to mention the SKA, because I think it's very important.
Yes. But I think
Yeah,
what's fascinating about that is unless you go out there,
yeah,
you have no real idea of what is going on out there in terms of the international collaboration, in terms
yes,
of what people are coming here to do, what they are
yeah,
finding, what they are
yeah,
documenting. It's kind of
yeah,
literally under the radar, so to speak. So it's only once you go, then
yes,
you say,
yeah,
oh, because I mean,
yeah.
when I was in Sutherland at going to the observatory there, you got all these little
Mm.
places where there are
Yes,
different universities who've got their book time and
absolutely.
their
Yeah,
spaces. And
yeah,
then, you've got your slot, and anything you discover in that slot, you own. And then, depending on when your slot is, it's your luck
yeah,
what you see or don't see. But as I said, you don't have a sense that there's all this activity that's taking place. And it's pretty profound stuff, actually.
yeah, yeah, it is. Look, it's been, I don't know how accurate this statement is, but it has been called the most ambitious engineering project ever undertaken by humankind. So yes, it is massive in that sense.
Yeah.
And I think that in decades to come, it will probably produce science that'll shatter everything we know about the universe, and hopefully will answer things like whether we're alone and you
Well, I
know,
think that is, because I was going to come to that.
yeah,
Again, the link between neuroscience and astronomy,
mm,
asking the big
mm,
questions. And I mean,
yeah,
from an astronomical point of view,
mm,
is that the correct word? I was going to say
yeah, yeah,
astronomical, but astronomical point
yeah,
of view, I
yeah,
mean, that's a big question. Are we alone? Is it
mm,
just us?
mm,
You know?
mm,
And then from a
mm,
neuroscience point of view, this whole issue of consciousness.
yeah,
And I don't know if you want to get into that discussion, but it triggered
mm,
quite a few thoughts in my mind in terms of artificial intelligence, but just in terms
yes,
of consciousness. I mean, it's a
mm,
big deal searching
mm,
for the source. So
yeah.
what is, I mean, I'm not putting you on the spot, but what are your thoughts on that?
Um, yeah, I mean, consciousness is the so-called hard question, one of the hard questions of science, because it's, after centuries of thinking about it, we're no closer to knowing what it actually is and, you know, where it sits in the brain and, um, sentience. And you raise an interesting point about AI. There's a huge
Yeah.
debate raging at the moment about whether AI could become sentient. And I don't know enough about that to comment.
Well,
But
I
what I think,
think,
yeah.
no, carry on, carry on.
Um, no, but what I think is interesting is that if you just think about our skulls and how small our brains are, the fact that we can
Yeah.
actually comprehend the universe to the extent we do, that's almost miraculous. That for me is already gives it, is enough of a mystery to, to provide a lot of thought and thinking around that without actually wondering, well, what is consciousness? Just the fact that we can understand it. And then that little study that I mentioned, that was kind of a playful, almost like a poetic idea. I have no idea because I can't, I'm not qualified to comment on the physics and the mathematics of it. But that article where a neurosurgeon and an astrophysicist actually looked at the large-scale structure of the universe and the structure of the brain and found similarities, that was interesting.
Now that kind of caught my attention, because I was thinking to myself, you mentioned that the universe and the brain have a very similar structure in terms of nodes and filaments, whatever that means exactly.
Yeah.
And that the difference is really in terms of scale, 27 times greater the universe than the human brain. And again, I started
27
to think, well,
orders of magnitude. Yeah.
Orders of magnitude, sorry, orders of magnitude.
Yeah.
And I started to think, okay, so the brain is kind of either replicated in the universe, or the universe is, there's a replication between these two systems. And so I can understand. And when I thought about it, I thought, wow. I mean, one doesn't think about these things, but when you start thinking about it, it is kind of miraculous in a way. And I think that was the word that came to mind. And then I started thinking about sentient AI, and I thought, well, if they're going to create sentient AI, or AI is going to create a sentient version of itself, that's pretty scary, because then that means that AI will have unraveled the essence of human consciousness.
Yeah. my own opinion about that is that I don't think that that's going to happen. But maybe that's a conversation for another time.
Absolutely. Now, listen, I've got a concern about AI, and I mean, without going off onto that tangent, the reality is that as much as it's being sold for its efficiency, I don't think enough is being said about the potential unintended consequences and the dangers. And so without being anti-progressive, I'm also kind of more preserving of what it means to be human, and what it is for us as humans to remain as we are. So, but it's kind of interesting, because it's this coming together of neuroscience and astronomy that kind of triggered that thinking. And of course, the billions of neurons and the billions of stars, which I think is amazing, actually.
Yeah, that's just in our galaxy. So again, a bit of a contrivance, because obviously there's many more times stars than the human brain in the entire universe. But I just wanted to make the point about, seeing as we were talking about AI, what is relevant is that machine learning is going to help us to sift through all that and understand all the data. I mean, I can't remember the figures now, it's somewhere in the article, but the amount of data that's going to be down, piped down from the sky per second is just mind blowing. When the SK is finished, and I just want to say to viewers or listeners that that there are 2 open nights or open weekends at the SKA site near Carnarvon, which are open to the public.
Limited, I would imagine, though.
Yeah, I was fortunate to go last winter, and it was quite an amazing experience. So they actually take you onto the SKA plane, where all the 64 dishes of the meerkat array are. And I mean, each one of those dishes is, the size of, it's several stories high in terms of building.
Each
so you
one.
imagine a 3 or...
Each one.
Each one, yeah.
And there's 64 of them.
There's 64. So it's a very surreal, futuristic, because you've got this high tech and then you've got the Karoo landscape. So they're building quite a few more. And if memory serves, there'll be somewhere in the region of 208 or 210 thereabouts when it's finished in 2030. So it's quite a thing. I do want to say that there's, although it's a magnificent scientific achievement, ongoing scientific achievement, and it's bringing a lot of kudos to South African science and astronomy and engineering, because a
Yeah.
lot of the software and the engineering was developed locally, much of it at Stellenbosch University. It's not without its critics. I mean, this is a multi-billion dollar or euro exercise. It's happening in the
Right.
global south. A lot
Right.
of farmers and laborers and workers and people who live in that part of the Karoo have been displaced and their
Yes.
livelihoods taken away. So there's a whole other sociological
Yes.
side to that discussion, which people need to be aware of as well. But I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I
No,
am aware
but
and have been reading about it, and it's very relevant, particularly in South Africa,
well, I think it's so important, and I'll tell you why. When I was driving through the Karoo, and I got lost a couple of times, I have to tell you, and I landed up on dirt roads, and I thought, where the hell am I? But I just kept going. And I was encountering these huge wind turbines throughout
Yes.
the Karoo. And I found myself becoming increasingly antagonistic to these structures that have been put on top of hills, and they are huge, and they dominate the landscape. And I was thinking, at what cost? There's always a cost to apparent progress, the greening of the environment, etc., etc. But when you drive through the Karoo and you see it for this precious piece of landscape that we have, it's like you don't want anything to contaminate it. And yet, here we are. SKA, the wind turbines, wind power, etc., etc. So I can relate to that. And then my question was, okay, somebody's making a lot of money building these things. And what I discovered from one of the engineers that I encountered, because I'd see the engineers coming through in Sutherland, and I was like, who are these guys? And so I started chatting, and they were there to service these huge structures. And what he was telling me was that the power that's generated is kind of for distant industry. Actually, it doesn't
Right.
necessarily serve the local population. And essentially what you do is you've got an industrial base hundreds of kilometers away. You invest billions of rand in creating these structures to provide you with power, which drives the economy, etc., etc. So I think there are a lot of questions around ethics and morality, and all of these things come into it. So I think your point is well made, that one can look at progress. Sometimes you've got to look at the social consequences of progress,
Yeah.
and you have to weigh and balance. I think that's what you're
Yes.
talking about.
I am. Yes. Yeah.
Yes, and I can sympathize and I can relate. And I think it's once you're there and you really take it in and you think, geez, I don't know if I want those structures on top of the hills. And they want to build more. It is kind of surreal. The other issue that I wanted to speak about was this concept of passive material that links astronomy and neuroscience. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I don't think it's that interesting in the sense that
Okay.
they talk about dark energy and dark matter, and we don't know what that is. So it's kind of
Right. Okay.
that's almost like the end of the conversation, because we can only speculate about what those things is, what those things are. But I think what they're saying is, there's 95% of the observable universe is actually only 5% of it is matter that we can see. So
Right.
95% of stuff that we can't see. And I think
Yes.
all they were saying is that in the human brain, there's, it kind of floats in water and supporting structures and so on. So there's the analogy. But as I say, I
Yes.
wouldn't I wouldn't see too
Yes.
much into. I think it's an interesting analogy that gets people to think.
Yeah.
But how robust the actual association is, I don't know.
Well, it's just an interesting,
Mm,
water versus dark energy,
yeah.
passive material. And so it's another aspect that kind of draws the two together in that
Yes.
sense.
Yeah.
Then you spoke about the universe versus the multiverse. Again, I mean, I hadn't really thought about it, but you brought it into everyday life. So I'm going to leave that to you to discuss the universe, the multiverse, and how it's actually very real, whether we realize it or not.
Yeah, well, the multiverse is a theoretical idea that, this universe that we inhabit, that we seem to inhabit, is just one of many potential universes that either exist um, simultaneously with this one,
Yeah,
or other space-time dimensions, I suppose. I mean, it's difficult to get one's head around the science, because a lot of it involves quantum mechanics and so on. But as I
right.
understand, but the idea fundamentally is that this may not be the only reality. And I was just making the point that, and again, taking poetic license with it, that all of us see the world in a different way. So,
Yes.
it's an idea that seems obvious to me, and I'm sure to many people listening to this, that um, in one sense, in an abstract sense, there are as many worlds or universes as there are observers, because no two people will see things in exactly the same way. And I think that's an interesting idea.
I
Um,
found that I found that quite profound, actually, to say, well, we live in a multiverse because everybody
yes,
sees the world in their own way. So this whole
yeah,
universe, multiverse. So I think, again, there'll be many aspects of what we're talking about that we are not necessarily experts in, but certainly from a point of view of something to think about and concepts which are new and unfamiliar, which may have relevance for everyday living, which brings me to personality and astronomy.
mm,
Because I think that
mm,
the issue of astrology versus astronomy needs to be made, I think, to
right.
distinguish the two. So maybe you would elaborate a little bit in terms of how you see the differentiation, which is a
Yeah,
critical one.
I mean, yeah, that's a very easy one. I mean, astronomy is the scientific study of the universe, and astrology is the belief that our fates are determined by the
Stars.
relative positions of stars and planets, particularly at the, either the moment of conception or time of birth. I think traditionally, but I
Yes.
mean, yeah,
Time
I don't think
and place. Time,
and place.
place.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
All,
Yes.
I know because I've
But
been to an astrologist. I like
okay.
astrology. I have to I have to tell you, I like astrology, and I think that these characterizations according to your star sign, there seems to be some truth in it. But maybe we just see what we want to see of ourselves in those descriptions. I'm not sure.
Probably. Yeah.
And I
I
think
mean, yeah.
you made the point that many early astrologers were in fact astronomists.
Many early astronomers were also astrologers. In other words, they
Yes.
studied the universe, but that simultaneously held the belief that their destinies were determined by the stars. I don't think you'll find a single astronomer today who
Yeah.
believes that. But I think your interest in it is, I understand it, because even though I don't adhere to astrology. I think that what's interesting about it from our perspective is that it was one of the first attempts to categorize personality,
Yes.
and that is in and of itself very interesting, and it shows that we've always wanted to do that, and we were grasping at ways to do so. Um,
With,
yeah.
and I'll tell you what I found interesting because I very much like Cloninger. And I like Cloninger's dimensional approach to personality, looking at temperament and character, which speaks to what you have written about, which is genes and environment as
Yes.
determining personality. And Cloninger's kind of theory evolved in terms of 3 dimensions of temperament to 4, and then he added the 3 dimensions of character, and one of those is self-transcendence. And I think there
Right.
is where you start to find a link between personality and the universe, because I think self-transcendence is about that, the connection to something bigger. So in a way, it's not astrology, and it is the scientific study of personality, but yet there's a link. And I think self-transcendence is that link. I don't know. That's what I kind of think. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think that Yeah, I mean, I don't know about self transcendence as a temporary state. Is that what you're referring to? Like a connection to something bigger than yourself?
Yes, I think it's that you are not alone in the universe and there's something more than
Yeah,
yourself beyond, and that
yeah,
sort of links to spirituality and how you view yourself, how you place
yeah. I
yourself
mean,
in a sense.
I think that some words that I like to link to the experience of stargazing are, a sense of the numinous, numinous, which is a lovely word, and it sort of conveys a sense of transcendence,
Yes.
and what about a connection to something bigger than yourself, and that fits into the awe and wonder, um, which I hope we can get onto.
Yes, we will. We're slowly working our way towards it.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, because I think those 5 or 6 factors um, are the real meat of
Yes.
why astronomy or amateur astronomy or stargazing and mental health is interesting. But
Yes, no,
yeah,
we'll
I hope
get we'll,
we've got time to get to those.
oh, we've definitely got
Yeah.
time, but there was one other thing that I wanted to mention, because in a sense it spoke to me of the fragility of
Yes.
our life and
Mm,
us as humans. And that's a phrase that you use called the anthropic cosmologist principle, which I was
yeah.
at first, wow, what is that?
eh,
And then I looked at
Yeah.
it as you described
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah.
if you can describe it, I will give you my commentary on how I experienced what you described.
Um, cosmic
Because there's those four.
anthropological principle. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Again, look, this is an idea that I introduced because it's interesting and it links things together, but it's an idea that has drawn much skepticism and criticism from the professional astronomy community. Not, I would say, in the weak form of it, which I described, which is that the universe is constructed in such a way that it supports life.
Right.
Um, but at the same time, if it didn't, we wouldn't be here to make that observation. So it's kind of like a bit of a self-defeating argument. But the stronger forms of it, and there have been some very strong proponents of it, some very well qualified people who've written about the idea over the decades, is that it's not just chance, that the universe is actually designed in a way that it must produce sentient life at some point. Now that's as I say, been met with a lot more skepticism, and yeah, I think the idea that I wrote that I mentioned was John Wheeler, who was a physicist, a very formidable physicist who wrote of the participatory universe, or the participatory form of the anthropic principle, which is that the universe is required. Sorry,
Yes.
observers are required to bring the universe into being. In other words, it would be meaningless unless there were people there or not people, unless there was consciousness there to actually manifest it in consciousness and understand it and marvel at it, which kind of taps
So we
into one of
come
your earlier comments about
Yeah, so we
consciousness
come
and
back. So we come back
yeah,
to consciousness and the need for
yeah,
consciousness in order to make
yeah,
sense of the universe. It's
yeah,
how these things are interrelated requires some thought.
yeah,
But I think that what struck me was that you mentioned that there were four factors, and you mentioned gravity,
yeah,
electromagnetic force, nuclear forces, but they need to be in balance. And I thought to myself, well, if they are out of balance, does that mean we no longer exist? And then what does that say about the fragility of our existence as a
yeah.
species on this
Yeah.
planet in this way?
Yeah, well, cosmologists who adhere to the multiverse model or theory would say that that's fine because there will be probably an infinite number of other universes that don't support life, and we just happen to be in one that does support life. So big deal, nothing to get excited about. Um, I think that's how they would respond to that. But sorry, your question was.
Well, no, I think for me,
Yeah.
it's more when I contemplate that
Yeah.
principle and I think about what comprises the elements of that, it just induces in me a sense of humility that
Right.
actually
Fragility. Yeah.
fragility and humility actually. So
Yeah.
there's an actual consequence on me as an individual thinking
Yeah.
about who I am, where I
Mm.
am. So I think there is actually a profound consequence for individual psychology
Yeah.
when you start to think about these things, which,
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm glad that you mentioned that word, which I remember now. That was uh, in your comment a few minutes back, was this question of fragility, which I do
yes,
mention because, and I think really interesting fact is that if the Earth were the size of a basketball, it's fun to ask people this: how thick would the atmosphere be? And it's usually like an inch or a couple of centimeters, or maybe even more. I mean, it might be as like really wide, but it's actually just as it in proportion. It would be as thick as a coat of paint, which really gives one a sense of we can't
fragility.
survive without breathing, and we're messing up the planet big time, and climate change and everything, global warming,
Yeah.
and we can't afford to take these chances. And I just want to link what we were talking about now with the um, uh, anthropic principle. I actually watched a podcast recently by Brian Cox. I don't know if that name means
No,
anything to you.
I'm not
He's a
familiar.
popularizer, well, he's a scientist who does wonderful documentaries. A lot of them are on YouTube on cosmology and astronomy and so on. So just a few days ago, he spoke about something called the what is it called now? The Great Filter Hypothesis. And the Great Filter Hypothesis derives from the Fermi paradox, which is Fermi was an Italian
Yes,
physician.
Fermi. Okay.
And that is, if there's other sentient life out there, how come we haven't come across it? And there's a lot of reasons why we wouldn't have if there was. I mean, the vast distances between the stars being one of them. But Brian Cox articulated this hypothesis, which I don't think it's his. I've heard it before, but it's worth iterating at this point. That there's
Yes.
a good chance that if there are civilizations out there that have reached our level of technological advancement, there's a good chance that they've wiped themselves out, either through the same things that we're doing: war, nuclear events, AI wiping us out, climate change, etc. And that is a plausible. So that the filter means that filters civilizations out, meaning that if any make it through that, and his estimate is that even though we know that there are trillions of planets, even in our galaxy, which means that there are untold trillions in the entire universe, the chances are that probably there is only one technologically sophisticated civilization in our own galaxy, and we may be it.
May.
Yeah. And then two astronomers, Barrow and Tipler, who actually wrote the textbook on the cosmic and anthropic principle,
Yes.
cosmological anthropic principle, uh, several decades back, reckoned that there's probably only one civilization in the entire observable universe. So there may be others, beyond what we can see. So what this means, I find it quite sobering, because I like to fantasize, especially when I'm looking at galaxies through telescopes,
Yes.
they're probably teeming with intelligent life, but they're probably not. And it gives
Ah,
one a sense that we need to be much more invested in feeling that our own existence and our own biosphere is truly unique and precious, and we need to redouble, triple, quadruple our efforts to preserve it, because we're busy wiping ourselves out at the moment. So that's one of the ways I think that astronomy can change perspective, which is one of the benefits of
Yes.
stargazing that I talk about.
I've written that word. If you
Yeah,
could see my notes, you would have seen the word perspective, because I think that is exactly the point. And that is profoundly impactful psychologically if you actually think about it. So that brings us, we're going to segue to the benefits of
right.
stargazing and how it impacts positively, potentially,
Yeah,
on well-being, mental health, mental well-being. So I'm going to turn that over to you, because there are a whole host of reasons why, and I think that that's something that you really want to impress, I think, upon people, that this is not some
yeah,
esoteric
mm,
activity. There are actually profound consequences for the individual. So off you go.
yeah. Yeah, well, please do, ask questions and sort of clarify as we go along. But
Yes.
I, I've listed, yeah, I've listed six. And
Yes.
I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm just going to show people or viewers a
Yes.
chart. It's a
Okay.
laminated thing which I drew up and which I plan to hand out at star parties, and you'll see that it's
Right.
ironically, this wasn't by design. It's a star-shaped um, diagrammatic or schematic, I suppose, of what I've identified as benefits. Um,
Right.
and the first one I think is awe and wonder, which we touched upon. I think we should spend more time talking about that. The second
Yes, we
one is
should,
connect.
because you.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
The second one is experiencing a connectedness to nature.
Yeah.
I'll explain why that's important. The third one is exercising curiosity. The fourth one is enhancing or social connectedness, which we all crave and need as human beings. The fifth one is mindfulness, which is an interesting one, and that's draws the most comments from people. What do you mean by that? Is stargazing a
Yes.
mind experience? And then the sixth one, which I think is qualitatively different from the previous five, is perspective, because it seems to emerge from them. How do all of those things, connecting to nature, displaying curiosity, experiencing, or being with like-minded people, how does that change one's perspective or worldview? Um,
Yes.
Meaning, how does one see oneself in relation to oneself and to other people and to the wider world, and the wider world meaning the entire universe, actually, because I don't think that we can see the world outside of the context of the universe, because we derive from it. um
I think that is fascinating, because this
yeah,
issue of stardust, which we didn't touch on,
yes,
but the
mm,
issue of stardust, and let's just do a little
yeah,
deviation to
yes,
stardust, because I think it's not something that anybody, well, I certainly hadn't
yeah,
considered it, and I think it's quite
yeah,
profound, actually. So just want to talk a little bit
yeah,
about stardust and us as a
yeah,
species.
sure. Well, I think the important starting point with that, which a lot of people aren't aware of, is that stars themselves, of which our own sun is the best known example. Every star that we see in the sky, it actually has a life cycle, and the life cycle of stars has been very well described. Typically stars will have life cycles of over billions of years, but um, some of them have different trajectories, and stars themselves are very interesting. And usually when a star ends its life, it sort of implodes, it collapses in on itself, and then explodes outward in a massive explosion of high energy electromagnetic radiation, and that's called a supernova. And you're talking about things being flung out from the stars at relativistic speeds, meaning speeds which approach the, um, the speed of light. So tremendously violent cataclysmic events, which are probably happening all the time somewhere,
Yeah.
um, That's an important thing to realize, because what happens when that happens is that the heavier elements, which can only be formed in this way, you know, atomic nuclei compressed together and form heavy elements essential for life, they then get flung out through the cosmos, get incorporated into evolving planetary systems, and in that way deposited onto planets like our own. So life as we know it wouldn't be possible without calcium, oxygen, nitrogen, the heavier elements, phosphorus, magnesium, iron, and copper, and so on. All of those things which we're familiar with from our physiology. And so those things are actually born in the hearts of stars. And I think that that's a really, really interesting, lovely idea. And it was popularized by Carl Sagan. You may remember
Okay.
Cosmos,
Yes, I do.
80s,
Yes, the TV
Carl
series.
Sagan. Yeah.
Yes.
And he popularized that idea, which was actually developed some decades before, mostly from the work of two astronomers. But anyway, there you have it. So we are partially made up of star material, and when we look up
Correct.
at the stars, we sort of, there's a resonance there. So what I'm made of is partially coming from up there.
And that is profound. That is
Yeah.
profound. When you start to think about those stars are not just random objects up there. There's
Yeah.
actually a connection.
Yeah.
But getting back to some of the aspects that
Yeah.
contribute
Yeah.
to mental health through astronomy, the issue of wonder and awe, I want to touch on that one specifically,
Yeah.
and we'll get to the others. And your thoughts around wonder versus awe and what the implications of either are.
Yeah. So they're very closely related emotions. And I just want to say that, awe is getting a lot of attention because of its increasingly clear effects on human behavior, pro-social effects, which we'll get to in a minute. So the person who's probably written the most about this is somebody called Dacher Keltner, Keltner. He's an American psychologist.
First name Dacher.
Written Dacher, yeah.
Spelled what? D-A? Oh, okay. Not D-A, not D-A-G-G-A.
No. Keltner.
See where my mind is going. Okay, all right.
So he's written a book called Awe, which I would encourage people to have a look at. So I just want to look, because I do have a resource in front of me on, so I just want to skip through these.
Yeah.
There's some effects on physical well-being which don't impress me that much, because there have been relatively few studies on it, but experiencing awe is said to enhance immune functioning, and one study measured that through reduction of inflammatory biomarkers. I think that the psychological effects are much more interesting and well-researched. And that is increased pro-social behaviors, including kindness and sharing, increased humility, gratitude, and optimism, increased social connectedness, and increased life satisfaction. So for all of those reasons, I think awe is worth looking at. Without going too much down a side road. Yeah.
No, but I wanted to jump in there when you say it's got a positive effect on the immune system, and I'm thinking about the proliferation of autoimmune conditions and immunity as a real focus. And what I'm understanding from what you've said, and I don't know how robust the data is, but what you're saying is, well, awe has a positive effect on immunity.
Yeah, like I said, I'm sort of downplaying that because I think it was just in one study, and I don't know if it's been replicated. And
Okay.
I mean, arguably possibly any other state which improves optimism would lead to the same results. I don't know. I don't know enough about it.
Okay.
But awe is interesting because always interesting because it's so easily available. I'm
Yes.
interested in it in the sense that you trek out, to the Karoo and look at the night sky, because that's an absolutely almost guaranteed way of accessing it. But there's many other ways, just looking up at Table Mountain every now and again if you live in Cape Town.
Yes.
Being in any kind of nature-rich environment, which we're blessed to have a lot of in South Africa, musical awe, moral awe, visual awe. There's many types of awe. So the question for me, what's interesting for me is how much awe do you need to have these apparent psychological benefits, which have been mostly studied. Yeah, I mean, just reading about how they've measured and studied awe has been educational for me, because I think probably as psychiatrists, we read about emotions and we take them for granted, but we don't really understand how difficult it is to
Yes.
isolate an emotion and work with it.
Well,
So
that issue that you mentioned now, that awe is readily available. A simple illustration, and it may not be a great one. I can't stand mosquitoes. I don't know if anybody does like them. But I am awestruck by their ability to appear, disappear, move, and to almost sense your presence as they have a feeling that you're coming to get them. And I mean, you can step back from that and you can be awestruck by
yeah,
this
I agree. Yeah,
insect. So
yeah,
just to your point, that awe is everywhere, but it's a question of really recognizing what is awesome that is immediately in your environment. So it requires a level of consciousness, coming back to that
yeah,
concept
yeah.
of awareness, that external awareness, not just internal, but external.
Yeah. So you touched upon one of the interesting sort of almost paradoxical aspects of awe, which is that it doesn't have to be something big. It can be something, looking at a drop of water, river water or whatever, pond water through a microscope. You're looking at very small things, but you can also have a sense of awe. So what awe really is, the outstanding feature of awe is the need to accommodate the self into something vast. So the vast could
Yes,
be a microscopic world, or it could be, the universe, but it's being confronted with something either semantic or psychological or visual that is much bigger than oneself. And how does one accommodate the diminished sense of self into this? So when I say psychological, or that could be death. When we lose somebody, there's a sense of awe. It's tragic and sad, but there's also a sense of awe. It's confronting the unknown.
yeah, it's
Um,
profound.
you know, yeah, it's profound. So that really is what awe is. The other there's a polarity with awe in that I'm talking about mostly about positive aspects of awe, but there's also something called negative awe, which is where there's a feeling of fear or terror.
Yes, right.
So, for example, an environmental catastrophe or encountering a dangerous animal in the wild, those would classify as so-called negative awe, or in the presence of a powerful but dangerous leader. Now, just think about the language which dictators use when they talk about shock and awe tactics. We're going to
Absolutely.
carpet bomb somewhere and we're using shock and awe tactics. That's negative awe, but it's the sense of, nevertheless, even though there's terror, it's the sense of something unbelievably vast and powerful.
Yes.
But let's focus on the positive awe. Yeah.
No, but I think the negative awe kind
Mm.
of illustrates the power of awe. And I think that it's about saying, okay, but if we flip the negative to the positive and you experience the power of the negative, then you see the potential of the power in the positive. So I think it's an
Yeah.
important distinction to make. And I think
Yeah.
there's a positive take from that.
Yeah.
But you've also
Yeah.
mentioned the word perspective. And I think that's another aspect that is quite profound, is this sense of the vastness beyond us, which is potentially maybe for some people overwhelming, but for others
Yeah.
reassuring that we're part of something bigger. And I think that is important. So perspective is another contributor to a positive a sense of well-being.
Yeah, 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 I agree. Um, yeah, I think one of the most interesting, if we are going to talk about perspective in astronomy, I think one of the most interesting clues that all is linked to a changed and positive perspective is the so-called overview effect, which is the
Yes,
yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. It's the well-documented effect that astronauts and people on the International Space Station and so on, they, floating in space, looking at the Earth, and they come back with a profoundly different sense about their place on it and their relationship with not just humans but all life forms, and a strong need to preserve it and to have a changed perspective on war and geopolitical conflicts and so on. And what's now, of course, we don't have that um, luxury of being blasted off into space and
yeah,
experiencing it
no,
first. But they have done studies, some very interesting studies, including VR studies, virtual reality headphones and so on, where even being shown those kind of images can induce
right.
similar feeling in people. And I think that's interesting. Yeah.
Very interesting. One of the other
Yeah.
things you mentioned, and I think it's very relevant in today's awareness of cognitive decline and major cognitive disorders in psychiatry, is the impact on cognition
Yeah.
through astronomy.
Yeah.
And maybe you just want to
Yeah.
talk about a few aspects of that, just to emphasize the point that there's a powerful positive impact on cognition.
Yeah. I think there is, in the sense that, and I touched upon a few of those in the article. There's really to understand basic astronomical concepts. If you're encountering them for the first time, something as simple as how does the speed of light inform, you've heard this term light years and light minutes. What does that
Yes.
actually mean? And you can only
Yeah.
really understand it if you understand the speed of light and the corollary that to actually look at anything in the sky is to look back at it in time as it was when the light first left it.
I
And
think
so I think,
that for me was the fact,
yeah,
and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm literally looking at the past when I look into the sky.
yes, you are. That is correct.
And I found that very unsettling, to think that, gee whiz, you're seeing it in real time. For you, it's
Yeah.
very present, but
Yes.
actually, it's the
Yeah.
past.
Yeah.
I think that, that really kind of stretched my mind a little bit. I don't know. I mean, I might be unusual in that sense, but that was the experience I had.
Yeah. No, I think that is another sort of awe-inspiring and
Yes.
mind-stretching aspect of stargazing, which is very interesting. And we we can just see the Andromeda galaxy from the southern hemisphere at the right time of the year, not far above the horizon. And I've seen it a few times over the last few years, and it's just this little cigar-shaped smudge in a amateur telescope. But what's really interesting, apart from the fact of thinking how many life forms are on there or in there, is also the fact that the light that we are seeing when we bring our eye to the eyepiece actually left there 2.5 million years ago.
I
And
know. I
that's
mean,
how
get your
close
head
it
around that.
Yeah, yeah. No,
It's
that
it's
is
it's it's
mm,
it's profound. So
yeah,
I have to concur, in that
mm,
sense. So I
mm,
wanted to get to something that is
mm,
very close to your heart, which is
mm,
mindfulness. And just to look at
yeah.
some of the aspects of astronomy that speak to mindfulness in terms of benefit for mental well-being.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because what I think is that, uh, yeah, I mean, I could talk a lot about this, so just, interrupt as necessary. But um, there's
Me,
two ways of
interrupt.
approaching. Well, you know what I mean. Interject, remind me
Yes.
to go in a direction or whatever, or to clarify. But there's two ways of looking at this. So mindfulness, is well associated now with positive psychological effects. I don't think we need to spend too much time on that.
Yeah.
Mindfulness in the sense that if one spends time training in mindfulness, either through a, an 8-week course or something similar, and then maintains that practice, the idea is that there's improved emotional regulation, self-awareness, less self-criticism, that kind of thing, a kinder relationship to oneself and others. So I think, the objects of meditation are traditionally things like the breath or the body. But I think if the stars or the sky or whatever you're looking at night could be the object of mindfulness in a facilitated, structured way, say over a weekend retreat, that would be really, really interesting. I think it would be quite a
Could you just repeat
powerful.
that? Could you just
Yeah,
repeat that? Because
yeah,
I think it's important. You were saying?
okay. Um, yeah, I think if one could use the night sky as an object of mindful
Right.
attention, let me put it that way,
Okay.
in a
Yes.
in a structured way, um, structured and supervised way, I think that would be really interesting, and it would be interesting to see how people responded to that and if they got any benefit from it. But that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that I personally believe that if you take somebody with no experience of mindfulness, or they don't even know what the word means, or they've never heard it before, when they're having that experience of looking at the sky with dark adapted eyes and that, oh, wow moment, or
Yes.
looking through the telescope and seeing the rings of Saturn or the moons of Jupiter or something amazing like that, it's such an in the moment experience with beginner's mind, curiosity, non-striving, acceptance, ticking all the mindfulness qualities, that I think whether the person is aware of it or not, they are having a quintessential mindfulness experience. That's my argument. I don't have any evidence for it, but I think that it's an interesting idea.
Intuitively, it makes complete
Mm.
sense. And
Yeah.
using myself as that wonderful sample of one, n equals one, I can concur, and I can say to you, yes, but I think you need to put yourself in that space with
Yes.
an an openness, and then to
Yeah.
experience it and say, wow. And so that word comes up a lot. So what I wanted to close with is just to say that obviously as city dwellers, I mean, we are cut off if we don't really think about it. And why would we? The sky is up there. But I think we're cut off from so much that is so potentially profoundly impactful in
Yeah.
terms of our psychological well-being.
Yeah.
That the how
Mm.
you carry on.
No, I think I just wanted to concur and echo that and strengthen that. I think that the night sky is a resource for sort of a reset and a place to find solace and tranquility and calm that is just it's there, and we should take more advantage of it. Of course, it's not available for everybody, particularly in our very unequal society, and that's a whole other
Sure.
conversation, which is worth having.
Absolutely.
And
Agreed.
we are
Agreed.
there's a lot of thought about how to make it more accessible for our greater population. But the other thing, Chris, before I finish, is
Yes.
one thing that is important to say is that
Yes.
even if people can't trek out to a star party or to Leeuwenbosfontein or wherever their nearest observatory is in the country, this it's a good alternative is to go into the city where there are established observatories, like the Cape Town Observatory here in the suburb of Observatory, which
We have
ironically
the
is next to,
planetarium, and
yes,
we have
in
the
in Joburg.
planetarium. Yes,
Yeah, I'm sure that
in
you've got the
Johannesburg.
equivalent scattered around Gauteng, and in other parts of the country. They all have open nights. Outreach is a big, big part of professional and amateur astronomy, which links into the building social capital. Astronomers are interested in
Yes.
building social capital, attracting
Yes.
newcomers. Quite strong social groups are formed in that way, and another benefit. So the next best thing viewers can do to get a sense of that, or is to go to the observatory. They have many open nights, because the advantage is you've got a massive telescope. So even if you've got polluted skies, which there are from the city, light polluted skies, you can still actually see a lot.
Okay, so I think
Yeah.
that's important. You don't have to trek
Yeah.
out big
Yeah.
distances. It's potentially available. And you did mention, just very briefly, the Astronomy for Mental Health project. You alluded to that in the piece. Now, I don't know if there's a specific project that's on the go, or if that's just an agenda that astronomers potentially have.
Yeah, no, it's just it's not a project on the go from my side. It's something that I'm interested in exploring.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think
So,
there's rising interest in that around the world and in South Africa, because things like astrotourism
okay.
is becoming a big thing. South African government's actually right now pouring a lot of money and resources into astrotourism, preserving dark skies. So I think we're in a good place and time to be not only asking the question, is stargazing actually good for one, but actually to research it as well.
Well, I like that idea, and I think that the whole issue of astronomy for mental health sounds like an excellent project based on our conversation. And the last thing that I wanted to say was that through reading the piece and in our discussion today, it struck me that the sky is a wilderness. We always think of
Yes,
wilderness in terms of animals and bush, but actually there's a wilderness up there that is available
absolutely.
to us to a
Yeah,
greater or lesser extent. So,
yeah,
Mark, it's been
yes.
fantastic, man. It's been lovely to talk to you. And
Oh,
obviously, there's so much more we could speak about. And as we discussed previously, each topic has got many subtopics that we could explore. But I think we've given
yes,
a sense that there
yes.
is a link between astronomy, mental health, well-being. And I think the point has been well made. And it's been such a pleasure spending this time with you. And I hope it's been something that you've enjoyed. I think you have, being able
Very
to
much.
just
Yes. Yeah,
share what's special to
yeah,
your heart. So
yeah,
I look forward to encountering you
yeah.
around. And
Yes, thank you.
it's been nice to be able to do it here and now.
Mm. Yeah, thank you, Christopher. Thank you for guiding me so easily and naturally through this and putting me at ease, and for inviting me. And I look forward to maybe a part 2 um,
Absolutely.
in the future. Yeah,
Absolutely.
because
Yes,
there's
me
lots
too.
more to talk about.
Thank you for joining and being part of this episode of Talking Psychiatry. If you would like to leave a comment, please feel free to do so. And until next time, take care.